This channel is not designed for entertainment or viral content. It exists for people who are actively healing, seeking clarity, or exploring the psychology behind their emotions and patterns. Every episode is carefully written and produced with emotional depth, reflection, and care. If you're here expecting casual commentary, high-energy hosts, surface-level discussions, flashy production, or entertainment-focused content, then we gently refer you to other channels offering just that. At DeepDive, we focus on quiet, deep, and intentional content to support those on a real mental health journey. If that's you, then welcome to our channel. You're in the right place.
Welcome to the DeepDive podcast channel. We're about to dive into something really important today, and honestly, often quite heartbreaking. It's a kind of quiet crisis happening in childhood, one that doesn't always show up as, obvious sadness.
That's exactly right. We're talking about childhood depression, and it can manifest in ways you might not immediately recognize.
Like irritability or pulling away.
Yeah, like irritability, withdrawal, maybe difficulties at school, things like that. Today, we're really digging into the roots, focusing on something often missed, the huge impact of, communication gaps and emotional neglect.
It feels like we're exploring that space between people maybe, or that void where real connection, meaningful connection should be. Our goal today really is to understand not just what childhood depression can look like, even subtly, but why. Why these breakdowns in emotional connection are so damaging for a child.
And we're drawing on insights from psychology, to help unpack these kinds of invisible wounds.
Yeah, to get at the why.
Absolutely. And for you listening, whether you're a parent, an educator, maybe just someone who cares about kids, we really hope this deep dive offers a clearer lens.
To recognize the signs, maybe?
Yes, recognize signs and, maybe more importantly, find some ways to help build those stronger, really life-affirming connections.
And just a quick note, if you're finding these insights helpful as we get into it, please do think about subscribing. It helps others find this channel too.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences later in the comments. That interaction is always valuable.
Definitely. Okay, so the foundations. You mentioned how early this all starts.
It really does. Our emotional health, the groundwork for it, is laid down incredibly early. And so much of that foundation is built, or sometimes, crucially, not built in those very first relationships.
Right. So attachment theory comes up a lot. At its heart, what's it telling us about how that early back and forth shapes a child's emotional world?
Well, essentially, it tells us that a child learns if their emotions matter, if they matter based on how their earliest signals are met.
Like crying.
Exactly, like an infant's cry. It's not just noise, it's communication.
Right.
It's a need. When a caregiver responds, consistently with presence, comfort, reassurance, the child learns, okay, my feelings are heard, my needs get met.
That sounds like building safety.
It is building a fundamental sense of safety. And it teaches the child that their internal state, their feelings, are actually worthy of attention.
And it's way more than just words, isn't it? Especially for little ones. They're like emotional detectives.
That's a great way to put it. Communication is... it's so much richer than just language. Those nonverbal cues are critical.
Like tone of voice?
Tone of voice, eye contact, just are they physically present and emotionally available? Children are incredibly sensitive to these signals. They're constantly scanning, especially their caregivers, to figure out, am I emotionally safe right now?
It makes me think about feeling emotionally invisible, like someone could be right there in the room.
But if they're checked out, distracted, looking at their phone, their tone flat.
Then the child feels unseen.
Profoundly unseen, emotionally invisible, even with someone physically present. And that emotional distance, it sends a really powerful, often devastating message over time.
Which leads us right into emotional neglect. It sounds almost passive in absence, but the impact isn't passive at all.
No, and it's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
People often misunderstand this. Emotional neglect isn't something actively done to a child, like physical abuse might be. It's the chronic absence of something vital.
What's missing?
It's the lack of emotional validation, of empathy, that feeling of attunement, encouragement, just acknowledging a child's inner world. It's what's consistently withheld.
So it's not one big event, but more like a steady drip, drip, drip of something missing.
Exactly, a slow erosion. And that makes it so insidious, so hard to pinpoint sometimes. There's no bruise to show, no single incident.
Just this growing feeling inside the child.
Yes, this lack of emotional mirroring where their feelings aren't seen or named or reflected back. It gradually tells the child your feelings aren't valid, or maybe even you shouldn't have these feelings.
What are some of the ways this absence shows up? Because it might not look like outright ignoring someone.
Right. It's often subtle, small, repeated interactions. It could be consistently dismissing feelings, oh, stop crying, it's not a big deal, or you're just being too sensitive.
That one's common.
Very. Or just a general lack of genuine curiosity about their inner life. What are they actually thinking about, dreaming about, worrying about, beyond just, grades or behavior?
What about control? Like really rigid rules, but no warmth.
Yes, that too. Rigid control without connection or explaining the why. Or simply the adults in the child's life not modeling healthy emotional expression themselves. If adults hide their own sadness or frustration, how do kids learn to handle theirs?
So the unspoken message the child absorbs from all this is,
your emotions aren't safe here. And by extension, you aren't safe here. At least the emotional part of you isn't welcome. It forces kids to sort of wall off parts of themselves.
okay, let's connect this directly to depression. How does this breakdown in communication become the fertile ground for childhood depression?
Well, children rarely use clinical terms. They don't usually say, I'm experiencing anhedonia. They communicate distress through behavior.
Right. Acting out or shutting down.
Exactly. They might become disruptive, maybe aggressive, or they might retreat inwards into themselves, into fantasy, into screens. They might stop doing things they once loved. Schoolwork might suffer.
So if the adults around them don't see that behavior as communication, or worse, punish it.
It teaches the child a harsh lesson. Trying to show how you feel, especially if it's pain or distress, is pointless. Or it gets you into trouble. The path to connection feels blocked, or even dangerous.
And those feelings that don't get expressed, they don't just evaporate.
Absolutely not. They get turned inward. They morph into self-doubt, a persistent sadness, maybe a deep sense of being fundamentally flawed or broken inside.
That sounds like the core of it.
It really is. This internalized void, this inability to name, understand, or share their emotional world. That's where the seeds of depression often take root. It's like losing the power to tell your own story.
So it's not just sadness, it's this profound sense of being cut off. From others, maybe even from yourself.
Precisely. That internalized loneliness is devastating. And here's the really tough part. A child in that situation often doesn't think, my environment isn't meeting my needs. They think,
Something's wrong with me.
exactly, I must be unworthy of love. I must be unworthy of attention. They internalize the problem rather than recognizing the lack in the environment.
Which makes recognizing the signs of depression in children so important because it's not always that classic image of sadness we might expect. Someone asked recently, actually, can a child be depressed without looking sad all the time?
Yes, absolutely. That's a key point and a common question. While persistent sadness or apathy is a major sign, you might see intense irritability, anger, or rage outbursts much more prominently.
So irritability could actually be a sign of depression.
It very much can be, especially in children and adolescents. Also, frequent crying without a clear immediate cause or expressing feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, saying things like nobody likes me or I can't do anything right.
And what about shifts in behavior or thinking?
Big shifts. Withdrawal is a key one, pulling away from friends, family, activities they used to find fun. A noticeable loss of interest or pleasure in almost everything, sometimes called anhedonia.
Like not wanting to play anymore.
Exactly. Or losing interest in learning, hobbies. Also, trouble concentrating, making decisions, even simple ones. And often, a drop in academic performance can be a flag.
And these signs can look different depending on age, can't they?
They definitely can. With preschoolers, you might see more clinginess, really intense separation anxiety, or even regression like starting to wet the bed again after being dry.
What about school-aged kids?
You might see more physical complaints, frequent headaches, stomach aches with no clear medical reason. Sometimes perfectionism can emerge, almost like trying to control something when their inner world feels chaotic, or trying to earn that approval they're missing.
And teenagers.
With adolescents, you might see more risk-taking behavior, unfortunately self-harm, or maybe experimenting with substances. The crucial thing is looking for changes from their usual self and a pattern, a persistent low mood or loss of interest that shows up across different parts of their life, not just a bad day or week. If you're wondering if withdrawal is just normal shyness versus depression, look for that loss of interest and persistent mood change across settings.
This naturally leads us to think about trauma. How does trauma intersect with all of this? Someone asked if trauma plays a significant role in childhood depression.
Oh, profoundly. Trauma fundamentally disrupts everything we've been talking about: communication, emotional exchange, trust. When a child experiences trauma, It throws their nervous system into disarray.
It makes connection feel unsafe.
Exactly. It damages their ability to trust adults, to feel safe, being vulnerable. They might become hypervigilant, always scanning for danger, always on edge, or conversely, they might emotionally shut down completely as a way to protect themselves.
So even if a caring adult is trying to connect, the child's own nervous system might be screaming, danger. Silence becomes a shield.
Precisely. The body's survival responses take over. Connection itself might feel threatening because it's been linked to pain or overwhelm in the past. It really resonates with that idea from the body keeps the score. The body holds on to what the mind might not be able to process or articulate.
That concept of unspoken stories held in the body is so powerful.
It really is. And we often see these stories come out physically. Somatic symptoms, we call them. Things like chronic pain, gut issues like IBS, sleep problems, even motor tics. They might look like purely physical problems, but often they're the body's way of expressing overwhelming emotional experiences that couldn't be spoken.
So knowing all of the foundations, the neglect, the signs, the trauma overlay, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls that keep these painful cycles going, even when adults mean well?
One of the biggest and most damaging is using dismissive language or invalidating emotions. We've touched on it, but things like, you're overreacting, or you have nothing to be sad about, or the classic, just get over it.
Why do adults do that? Is it discomfort?
Often, yes. Discomfort with strong emotions, maybe their own inability to tolerate distress, or sometimes they genuinely think they're helping, trying to logic the child out of the feeling.
But the actual message received by the child
Is rejection. It slams the door on communication. It reinforces any shame the child might already feel about having those feelings. It teaches them, don't show this part of yourself.
And that creates that listening gap you mentioned.
It absolutely does. And sadly, that gap is often widened because the adults themselves are struggling. Many caregivers are dealing with their own unresolved stuff, trauma, stress, burnout, just the sheer exhaustion of life.
Which makes it harder for them to tune in.
Exactly. It significantly diminishes their capacity for that emotional attunement, for being truly present and listening deeply. And without conscious effort, this can unintentionally repeat the very patterns of neglect they might be trying to avoid.
Okay, so how do we start to repair this? How do we build or rebuild those emotional bridges, especially if there's a history of hurt or misunderstanding?
This is where shifting towards what's often called trauma-informed communication is so vital. It's more than just techniques, it's a whole mindset shift. The core principles are really about fostering safety, providing validation, and practicing empathy.
Safety feels like the absolute foundation, non-negotiable.
It has to be. Creating environments where a child feels emotionally safe enough to be vulnerable, where they know it's genuinely okay to feel whatever they feel without being judged or punished.
And then validation, how does that work?
Validation is key to counteracting that internalized shame we talked about. It means acknowledging the feeling is real. It makes sense from their perspective, even if you don't agree with the behavior that came with it.
So saying things like,
Simple things like, I hear you, or I hear that you're feeling really angry right now, or that makes sense given what happened, even just, your feelings matter to me. It doesn't mean you endorse hitting, for example, but you validate the anger behind it.
okay, and empathy. How is that different from validation?
It's a subtle but important difference. Validation says your feeling is real. Empathy says, I'm trying to understand what that feeling's like for you. It's about stepping into their shoes, trying to feel with them, and just holding that feeling alongside them, often without jumping in immediately to fix it.
Just being present with the feeling.
Yes. Often difficult feelings just need to be witnessed and held by someone safe before they can start to shift or be processed.
So practically in a conversation, what does this active, empathetic listening look like with a child who might be struggling or withdrawn?
Well, first, genuine presence. Put the phone down, turn off the TV, make eye contact if that feels comfortable for the child. Use open-ended questions, not just yes, no. What was that like for you? Can you tell me more about that?
And reflecting back what you hear.
Yes, reflecting not just the words, but the feeling you sense underneath. It sounds like that was really upsetting, or it seems like you felt really left out when that happened. And again, you can validate the emotion while still setting boundaries for behavior. I understand you were furious, and hitting isn't okay. Let's figure out another way.
I really like this idea you mentioned of repairing the emotional loop. It feels more realistic than striving for perfection.
Oh, absolutely. None of us are perfect parents or caregivers. Repair is everything. It's about acknowledging when you've missed the mark, when you maybe reacted poorly because you were stressed or tired.
So you can go back later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go back and say, hey, I realized I wasn't really listening earlier when you were telling me about school. I was distracted, and I'm sorry, can we talk about it now? Or if a child shares something really hard, just holding that space, saying, wow, that sounds really difficult, without needing to have all the answers.
Those moments of reconnecting after a disconnect must be so powerful for a child.
They are lifelines. Seriously. They teach the child that connection can survive rupture, that mistakes can be acknowledged, and relationships repaired. And importantly, someone asked if these trauma-informed approaches are only for kids with diagnosed trauma. The answer is no.
They benefit everyone.
They benefit all children. They create safer, more understanding environments where everyone feels more seen and heard. It's just good relational practice.
Okay, let's get really practical. What are some actionable things parents, caregivers, educators could try, maybe starting today?
Building consistent emotional routines can be great. Simple things. Daily check-ins, maybe using a feelings chart for younger kids, or just a high-low share at dinner. Everyone shares a good part and a challenging part of their day.
Like making space for feelings intentionally.
Exactly. Even designating a few minutes of totally undivided emotion time where a child knows they have your full attention just to talk about whatever's on their mind, no agenda.
And using tools beyond just talking. You mentioned that's key for kids who struggle verbally.
Right. Absolutely essential. Offer outlets like drawing, painting, Play-Doh, music, maybe journaling for older kids. These things tap into the emotional and sensory parts of the brain, often where difficult feelings and trauma memories are stored, kind of bypassing the need for perfect words.
What about for educators in a classroom? How can they support a student who seems withdrawn or struggling internally?
Similar principles apply. Using nonverbal tools like emotion thermometers or simple check-in cards can help. Creating a designated calm-down corner with sensory items can allow kids to self-regulate when overwhelmed.
And focusing on the relationship first.
Crucially, build that relational trust before pushing hard on academics, and respond to challenging behavior with curiosity, not just control. Ask yourself, I wonder what's going on for this student today, rather than jumping to conclusions or punishment.
When do these strategies maybe signal that more help is needed? When is it time to seek professional support?
There are definitely indicators. If you see persistent sadness or irritability lasting more than, say, 2 weeks straight, if there's a significant decline in functioning at home, at school, with friends, and absolutely any mention of not wanting to be alive, any suicidal thoughts, or any self-harming behaviors require immediate professional help.
Don't wait on those.
Do not wait. Also, if you as the caregiver or teacher just feel unsure, overwhelmed, or like you're hitting a wall and things aren't improving, that's a completely valid reason to reach out for professional guidance. Trust your gut.
And what kind of help might be out there?
There are therapies specifically designed for kids. Play therapy is wonderful for younger children, using toys and play as their natural language to process feelings. For trauma, EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing can be very effective, especially for older kids and teens. And TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, combines cognitive strategies with trauma sensitivity to help kids build coping skills and resilience. These are just a few examples.
It really seems clear then that childhood depression often hides. It's in the silence, the withdrawal, the behaviors that might not immediately scream sadness. Every child who's struggling internally is trying to communicate something, even without words. They desperately need someone willing to listen beyond the surface.
Yes. Those communication gaps, that emotional neglect, they wound deeply, often silently. But when the important adults learn to speak that language of emotional presence, offering safety, validation, empathy, it's incredibly powerful.
It offers the belief that their inner world matters.
That they matter, that their feelings aren't too big or too much to handle, for themselves or for the people who care about them.
And that belief, that consistent, compassionate connection, even with its imperfections and repairs, that's really where healing can begin. It's not about having perfect words all the time.
Not at all. It's about showing up, being present, creating that space for children to maybe slowly rediscover their voice and feel that fundamental safety of being truly seen and heard.
So maybe a final thought for you listening today.
Consider the spaces in your own life, maybe with a child, maybe a friend, a partner, perhaps even with difficult feelings inside yourself where communication feels tough or where unspoken stories might be waiting.
What kind of emotional presence, what small act of listening or validation could you offer today to gently invite those stories forward?
Something to reflect on.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We really hope this conversation has offered some helpful insights.
Yes, thank you for listening. Until next time.